I'm Corey, and this is the Hardcore Skeptic Examines. So this time around I interviewed Randy Tyson. He's been a friend of mine for a few years now, and while we disagree on a few things, I thought it would be important to hear his views on social justice for this project. He's been on Brainstorm a couple times, and I've always enjoyed chatting with him. I think as part of the conversation, I said right or some other affirming things, even when I wasn't 100% on board with what he was saying. But sometimes what he said made a lot of sense, and doesn't actually contradict some of my views on social justice and much of what I think social justice advocates strive for. I'll have a few comments in the after the interview, and I found a few links to reference some of the claims he made, but during the interview, I didn't push back. I felt it was really important to listen and get his perspective. I think much of what goes wrong in these conversations is exactly this unwillingness to listen. We may disagree, but hearing what they're saying gives us a better idea of, even if you're just listening so that you have a better idea of how to refute it, that's the listening is a very important aspect of that. I listened to it in the moment instead of pushing back, and so that he felt like he was being heard. And I tried to do that in all of my interviews. I hope that I accomplished that. I listened multiple times during the editing process. There was some sound issues, so hopefully I got it sounding okay. But as a result of the sound issues, I had to listen. I listened to much of this interview 4, sometimes 5 times. So I feel like I really understand where he's coming from, and while I still disagree on some of his points, I really feel like I agree on some important aspects of what he's saying. I won't go too long into my post interview comments. I think the interview stands on its own. I think that if you disagree with Randy's points, then you will know once you listen to this where you disagree. And if you agree, then perhaps you will listen to further interviews that I do that can perhaps answer some of Randy's concerns. I really appreciate Randy's input on this, but because this is over an hour long, I really am not going to say much after the fact. I just have a few quick notes that I want to go through. I hope that all my social justice friends listen and hear what he's saying, even if that you can formulate good arguments against his points. I guess I already said that, kind of. Anyway, here's my interview with Randy Tyson on social justice. I hope you enjoy it. I want to start off with the question, because that I'm starting off with the same question with everybody. What is social justice?
Oh, it's a broad topic. I consider it to be a wastebasket container. It's anything that deals with society. It runs such a wide gamut from gender issues to assisted dying. It really is a wastebasket. It kind of doesn't have a hard and fast definition. It's just things get thrown in there, people that are important to people that involve society. And I think that's that kind of it's lumped together. It's not a cohesive thing.
Right.
Just one of the reasons I tend to think not in terms of social justice, but in terms of individual issues.
Right.
And so
that makes sense.
So people come to me, you deal with social justice issues. And the first time I heard this, I'm like, I do? I never thought of it that way. And I just thought of it as dealing with individual issues that I think needed to be addressed. For instance, same-sex marriage. I mean, it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
We've had it for 10 years. The sky hasn't fallen. And they keep blaming in the United States. I mean, being so close to the United States, we hear all this other stuff. I mean, we've already dealt with that one, right? It's something that is done. It's a done deal. Even Harper didn't want to touch it.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just individual issues to me. Some issues that are important to other people might not be as important to me. But people might lump them in as social justice, but I do think it is a kind of wastebasket term.
I guess that kind of goes to one of my questions that I have in my list here, is the idea that is social justice a monolith of a movement, or is it just a conglomeration of small movements, right?
Well, it's a conglomeration of a whole bunch of ideologies that try to work towards changing society, or at least getting society to recognize things. And some, like I said, for some people, one thing is important. For another group, it's another thing. And you know, if you talk about feminism or you talk about LGBT issues, I think that a lot of times, you know, especially feminism, tries to appropriate some of these things. Like, is LGBT equal rights a feminist issue? Some people would say yes. I would say no.
Yeah,
you can be both. It's, you know, you don't have one or the other. You can
some
be
crossover, right? But
sure, you know, it's not an exclusive thing. But sometimes it's tried to be made an exclusive thing. Can men be feminists? Some feminists say yes. Some say absolutely not.
Yeah,
you know, I think you can. I think you can be. A man can be a feminist. But
yeah, it seems fair to say that a man can be feminist, but I suppose I can also see why some people would try to make it a more exclusive type ideology.
Yeah,
where if you're not part of a group that you see as oppressed, then perhaps you can support that group, but you can't be part of it. I guess I can sort of see.
Well, this is the thing. It leads to things like intersectional feminism.
Right.
I see intersectional feminism as one of the most divisive forces in the social justice movement. It divides people into tiny groups. You know, like depending on whether you're white, black, which I think is frankly a racist form of feminism. Whether you're, whether you're overweight, or, I mean, some of the stuff that's coming out of especially intersectional feminism is simply insane. You have people that are saying that being overweight doesn't lead to health problems. Correlation's not causation. And I'm like, you know what? Consider it seriously. Facepalm. It's a denial of reality. To some of these people, not to everybody, but to some of these people, it's a denial of reality. I'm sorry, but being overweight is a risk factor for heart disease. It's a risk factor for diabetes. Right. It's a risk factor for stroke. In fact, it's causal, because fat can form an embolism. You know, it's nuts, and I don't find, you know, when people say, blacks in the front, whites in the back, I find that racist. I mean, it's certainly exclusionary.
Right.
You're basically creating, you know, it's almost like it's a revenge for history.
Right.
And I don't see that as helpful. I think it's divisive.
It's interesting because quite often I've heard of intersectional feminism, or intersectionality as a whole, as the attempt to bring these different groups together. So it's interesting the effect that it seems to have, or in some cases where it actually causes division rather than bringing them together.
Yeah, I think it is more divisive than cohesive. Christina Hoff Sommers went to a conference once, which was on intersectional feminism, and the whole thing just fell apart because of that.
Right.
You had art groups arguing. I mean, you get these crossover groups, and everybody's trying to figure out who's the most oppressed. As if, and it's identity politics. We've got to stop engaging this identity politics. I mean, being white says nothing about a person.
No, that's fair. Yeah.
It doesn't say, have I been poor as a student? Oh, God, yeah.
Right.
I know what it's like to be poor.
Yeah.
But I achieved things in my life that I'm very proud of. I didn't handed them because I was white and a male. I mean, give me a break.
Right.
Insulting.
What do you think of the idea, though, that say somebody who is a person of color would have had a harder time?
Yeah, absolutely. That can happen. That's not necessarily true, though.
It's not.
It's not cast in stone. That's the problem. We're classifying the character of people based on their skin color or their gender. Like there's that guy that you see on YouTube. You're a fucking white male. You're a white male, and it's like, wow. What do you say to something like that? Yeah, I am. Does that invalidate my opinions and ideas and experiences? No.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But it's certainly. I had this exact same thing. I was a TED Talk, and I said it was basically we should publish everybody's salaries. Never mind the whole workplace privacy thing here, but in the United States there is no such a thing as like there is up here.
Right.
So that you could see what everybody was making, and the gender gap would disappear. When gender earnings gap would disappear, and I'm just like, there's so much that goes into someone's salary that it's incredibly difficult to parse anyway. And I don't think it would be useful. And somebody came on and says, well, you're just a white male. And somebody else, thankfully, because it made a great opening for me, was said, why are you being racist and sexist? And she's like, no, I was just pointing out that, that I'm fighting for social justice, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, actually, you are being racist and sexist because you are saying that my opinion is invalid because of my skin color and my gender. That's racism and it's sexism. And that's what it is. I do not subscribe, of course, as you know, to the more recent definition of racism that's come out of rather left-wing, okay, let's just call it what it is, Marxist, postmodernist ideologies. And somebody was on your page, and I asked them, okay, is it racist, or is it not racist, what happened in Baltimore, where black mobs were pulling white people from cars and beating on them? And this person said, no, it's just violent prejudice. Now, setting aside the moral repugnance that I felt to that person, because I do, that's just an emotional response. This kind of, it diminishes that kind of crime. It diminishes it. It's purely a racial crime. Just because, okay, whether or not systems are inherently racist or not doesn't really matter, because in that moment, who had the power?
Right.
Obviously, it's the people who are doing the beating.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. That definition just doesn't work. It never worked to begin with, I don't think. It was meant to be used to describe broad societal systems, not individuals interacting with one another. And I don't even think it did a good job at all. I mean, to describe systems, because it ignores the fact that there are a lot of black police officers or police officers of color in general. There are a lot of black judges. There are a lot, it says that these are all white, and that's nonsense. It doesn't reflect reality.
What would you say if a person, to a person who asked, like, well, perhaps those black people have internalized a type of racism themselves against people of color or other black people, or how does one then explain, say, a disproportionate number of black people in prisons versus their population and density?
Oh, that's a complex issue. That's something that, one of the problems is that there are many reasons why black populations in prisons is so high. One is they commit a disproportionate amount of violent crime. Black men from between the ages of 16 and 34, it's more than they represent less than 6% of American population, but yet commit more than half of the violent crime in the United States. Now we can talk about why that is.
Right.
That's a question, and I'm not the person who would be good at speaking to that.
Right.
But it seems to me that goes a long ways to explaining it. There have been some problems in the justice system, racially speaking. We still do see it. 5 to 10% black people that are black that have committed a crime and are sentenced receive 5 to 10% larger sentences than a corresponding crime when committed by a white person, and that's a problem. That's not necessarily racism. When we talk about racism, we're talking about outward, full-blown racism. It could very well be explained by implicit bias, and the justice system is working towards addressing that. The bigger problem, though, is that, by the way, the differences in black and white sentences in women for some reason doesn't exist. It's the same. They don't have a differential there. I don't know. I do think there's a definite implicit bias there. But when you go to the sentences received by men versus women, nobody's talking about the 63% longer sentences men receive for the same crimes
than women.
No one. It's funny how that works. Why isn't that?
Yeah, it does seem to be something wrong with that, doesn't there?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I do think that it goes to thinking of women in terms of in the sexist manner as flowers, and we do have this feminine view of femininity that we treat them differently than men.
They're softer.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. They're softer. You know what I mean? I think you know what I mean. We have a different view of men and women in our minds, in our model, what they are like. Of course,
it's almost
whether it's true or not is completely different.
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, I don't think it is.
Yeah, I know some pretty hardcore girls, women. So.
Absolutely. Snowflakes. That depends on the person. A man can be a snowflake. A woman can be a snowflake.
Yep, for sure.
And then the opposite. It can be hardcore or soft, or both sides, both genders.
I guess we kind of touched on the idea of the oppression Olympics. Do you think that's a real issue in social justice movements?
I think it's a huge issue. I think it is so counterproductive in that people try to imagine somebody from the outside looking at it and people arguing about who's the most oppressed. And again, I've already touched on identity politics and how I don't want to use the word problematic. I think that word has been destroyed by social justice advocates. It's taken a perfectly good word and ruined it because they so misuse it. But it is problematic in the truest sense. In other words, you got to get rid of it.
Right.
It's got to go because it doesn't reflect reality.
So what is actually meant by identity politics?
As I mentioned, if I'm a white male, I'm ascribed a set of characteristics and assumed I have what's the word? What's it with a P?
Privilege?
Yeah, there we go, privilege. I don't know why that word escaped me. Assumed privilege. When I was a student, I didn't have any privilege. Nonsense. Everybody has the opportunity to go to university. And in fact, what's happening now is that there's so many scholarships out there for students that come from traditionally marginalized and disadvantaged groups. And
right.
there's none. And what happened in Australia recently was there was one that was for men, and boy, the hue and cry that happened. Oh no, we can't have scholarships only for men here. Like, oh my goodness, without even looking at the reason behind it. It's right. It's almost to the point where it's open season on white men. Or white women, for that matter, in the feminist movement. It's shut up and listen. Literally, that's a quote from Black feminists. There's something wrong with that. It's not a discussion when only one side's talking. We're not saying that people should have their experiences invalidated, but right. I have a problem with experiences only because microaggressions. This is the perfect example. One of the areas this drives Christine, my co-host, nuts. He hates microaggressions. Microaggressions can be real, but 99% of the time they're not. It's totally the perception of the person who thinks they're oppressed because they add something else in their heads. Now, this one, she has a friend who was complaining that he hated it because he's a person of color. He hated it when somebody said he's very well spoken. Well, that's just a compliment. But what he's doing in his head, he's adding for a black guy.
Right.
And maybe he's heard it before, but he's also been conditioned to
there's some social conditioning there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And so it's having an impact on her because she when she wants to compliment him on something, she can't do it. But she's very reticent to do it because of what he is going to think about it. I find that a problem with that. It's take the damn compliment. The person didn't necessarily mean they were surprised because they didn't think that a person of color could be eloquent.
I think it's fair to look at the context of the situation, right, rather than assuming one way or the other.
Absolutely. Context matters, and this is something that I think is disappearing. I mean, there's been the whole, that Ellen DeGeneres photo.
Right.
With her riding a Saint Bolt. The Saint Bolt thought it was hilarious.
Right.
I didn't think it was hilarious, but I mean, it was, I just got ha, funny. And it never occurred to me that it was racist.
Right.
People were saying, well, because back in, slavery days, white men used to use black men as beasts of burden. I'm like, well, how long do we have to have history pounded over our heads? She didn't mean it to be racist.
Right.
It's people adding something to the interpretation of it.
She was actively ignorant, basically, of the history of this.
I just don't think history matters.
In this particular case.
In this particular case, because it's just, it was a joke. She had no intention of it. If anything, she didn't care that Usain Bolt was black. Isn't that what we should be striving for? It's amazing how colorblindness has been labeled as a racist thing. All it means, I'm not denying somebody's personal history because, it's not like I don't see that person as having a different skin color than me. It's that I don't treat them differently. And why aren't we striving for this? To say colorblindness is somehow racist, a new form of racism, is just spitting on the grave of Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, in his speech, he wanted his children to be judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Right.
I just don't understand it. Freedom of speech is another one. This is this thing that, on campuses.
Yeah.
I abhor any, if somebody's an invited speaker, they get to speak. That's it. I don't care what they're speaking about. And I'm not, Robert Zimmer, who's the president of the University of Chicago, has said that he will not stop any invited speaker. It doesn't matter who it is. And he was asked to point out, what if it was Robert Spencer? And he said, yeah, fine. And I agree with that. Because universities are where we're supposed to be having an exchange of ideas. People that are offended by a speaker Well, first, I don't care about anybody's offense when we're talking about the broad, the broader view.
Right.
Whether you're offended or not, well, that's irrelevant. I mean, an idea, how you react emotionally to an idea is, to me, irrelevant. If you don't like an idea, you have your own speech. And we're just seeing all this the tail is wagging the dog at universities, where university students are getting offended, and they're basically forcing universities to, well, they're not forcing them. The universities are becoming complicit in this, and I don't understand why. Students don't know enough. I mean, this is why they're students. They don't know enough to, for instance, understand what it is they're supposed to learn. There's a class in philosophy in a London university. They didn't want to learn about white philosophers like Plato or Kant.
Yeah, I did hear about that. That struck me as rather odd.
Holy shit! I mean, yeah, you can learn about other ones, but why are these people limiting their horizons? I mean, you're supposed to be broadening them. You know, it's fine to learn about African philosophers. I mean, but why are you saying, it's colonialized philosophy? I'm like, oh my goodness. You just a recognition that ancient Greece was one of the most important times in philosophy. That isn't because you don't like white people. That doesn't change that. And you're supposed to, when you get a degree, you're supposed to be able to be. You're supposed to have a knowledge base that's determined by other experts in that discipline, and you're supposed to be able to talk intelligibly about these things. And I see this as being very counterproductive. It's amazing. I don't understand what's going on. This didn't happen 20 years ago, and it certainly didn't happen when I was in university in the 80s. It's nuts, and I blame parents. I really do. You've heard of helicopter parenting.
Yeah.
And I think that's, helicopter parenting is the extreme of the parenting that's been going on, where people are, protecting their children a little too much. We're seeing it actually from the city of Calgary. I mean, they're taking down ice forts.
Oh, really?
In the middle of winter, kids playing and making ice forts. What is going on? I just don't. It's like the world has gone crazy around me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to say that I'm the only sane person in the world, but my wife just says the same thing about it. So, I trust her
right.
implicitly. So, she's not a dummy.
Right. Yeah. So I guess that's it. There's a lot to digest in that.
It's frustrating to watch what's going on in universities, because I'm a big proponent of universities. You're going to university to be exposed to ideas, and whether or not they offend you or not, who cares? You're supposed to be able to respond to them intelligibly. And I'm seeing things that are not intelligent at all. I mean, disrupting somebody else's free speech. What happened to Jordan Peterson again? I may not agree with a lot of what Jordan Peterson says, but I sure as hell don't agree with the people that disrupted his talk as an invited speaker. Those people are not engaging in free speech. That is, creating a disturbance is a crime. It's a minor crime, but it's still a crime. And why aren't the universities doing something about it? You can protest. I'm not saying people can't protest, but you do it in a way that promotes rational discussion. This doesn't promote rational discussion. Interrupting a speech and shutting it down because you yell louder than the guy that's talking, that's not rational discourse to me.
Right.
And what really saddens me is that these are the future leaders of society. It scares me. It does. Because I don't think they can think. They think it's okay not to think. That's the amazing thing. It's this tide of anti-intellectualism that is gripped the United States especially. But it's coming up here now.
Do you think that's actually different than in the past, though?
Yes. Oh, gosh, yes. Yeah.
It seems to me that anti-intellectualism has been around.
Oh, anti-intellectual? Oh, no. Okay. No, I'm just talking about the tactics. Yes, there is a history. It kind of comes and goes. We talked about this with Lawrence Krauss. And, it's in the 50s there were books written that were anti-intellectual.
Right.
I don't understand why people don't recognize that expertise has value. People think that their own opinions are on the same level as someone who has spent a lifetime studying in detail. Like somebody who's looked at an issue for 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
But I looked it up on Google.
What's that? Oh, yeah.
But I looked it up on Google.
Yeah, exactly. Google University. It's had its pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
The information is out there. I think it's had one of the most important effects that Google has had is in the atheist community. For sure, eh? There will be another paradigm shift. Who knows what it'll be, but these things will happen and happen and happen. But we'll steadily grow, and I hope it keeps going. But more and more people are coming out and not afraid. This is another thing. A lot of fear is a big problem in social justice community because it makes people. There's a lot of personal attacks going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they eat their own. I mean, you step out of line and watch what happens when somebody dares to question the established dogma. I've known people. I'm one of them that got out of feminism because it doesn't mean I'm not a feminist. I'm just not involved in the feminist movement because I actually dared to question things. And I'm not the only one. It's one of the reasons that in the United States anyway, only 18% of women identify as feminists. And feminists are all like, why aren't they? Well, there's a lot of reasons why they're not identifying as feminists. That doesn't mean they don't believe in equality. It just means that they find the feminist movement to be kind of
something about associating themselves with the label that.
Yeah, it's
like an issue.
Because people bring out the dictionary definition of feminism all the time, but I find so few that adhere to it. There's so many different kinds of feminism. I mean, you have gender feminism, which is one of the crazier ones. It talks about there being no such thing as biological sex, and I'm like, have you ever talked to a biologist? I mean, they're talking about something which has been addressed by science,
right? I did read an article not that long ago that made it so, pointed out that it isn't quite as clear cut as some people like to think.
Yeah, but those are what they're doing is bringing forward the exceptions. But the problem is that those exceptions actually prove the rule. There is no new third sex. I mean, hermaphrodite.
No, that's
hermaphroditism. Is that right?
I'm not sure.
Hermaphrodite. There. I don't want to. Being a hermaphrodite doesn't mean it's a new sex. It's just a combination of both of the original ones. No, that's completely separate from gender identity, and so many people conflate the two, and that's one of the biggest problems.
Yeah.
Gender identity, knock yourself out. I don't care. Just don't tell me that the vast majority of trans men and women don't want these gender neutral pronouns. They just want to be called by the pronoun or referred to by the pronoun that they transition to. This, like Riley Dennis. Have you ever watched her videos?
Name rings a bell, but I don't think so.
She's a trans woman. Her videos are posted on by Everyday Feminism, which is a really interesting website. It's from our perspective, it's entertainment. This Riley was saying that talking about Islamophobia. Here's another regressive thing: is the word Islamophobia. There is no such thing as Islamophobia. There is anti-Muslim bigotry, absolutely, but we already have a term for anti-Muslim bigotry. It's anti-Muslim bigotry. Okay, there's no Christianophobia. There's anti-Semitism, but I do have a problem with the term anti-Semitism because, in the sense that I don't agree with Judaism. Yeah, I suppose if you take the word as its etymology is, meaning against Judaism, well, that's it. I'd be an anti-Semite, but I'm not an anti-Semite in terms of
the human beings involved.
Yeah, exactly. The difference between there's so much of a misunderstanding, and I do understand why. Attacking ideas such as Islam, Judaism, Christianity is not the same as attacking Jews, Christians, and Muslims. They're very different things. But people identify with their beliefs so much that they don't understand the difference between the two.
Yeah.
Now, it's a problem. And this, what happened in Ottawa with Motion 103, if they'd changed the word Islamophobia to anti-Muslim bigotry, hey, great. You did the right. But they doubled down and left the word Islamophobia in. And while motions don't become law, they can, because they go to House Committee for Study. And I find it very dangerous. And it's just it's a word that is in vogue. Right? It's not even in the dictionary.
It seems like so many other terms that it gets overused and
it's like toxic and
and used in ways that incorporate people that it shouldn't. And
yeah. I mean, Islamophobia is different from anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, I agree with its use. It's people that hate Jewish people.
Yeah, the general use of that has actually fits.
Exactly. So that's why it's kind of got a love-hate relationship with that word.
Right.
The problem with Islamophobia is it was designed with a purpose, and it was designed to deflect any criticism of the tenets of Islam, and shame people and saying, "Oh, you just hate Muslims." No, sorry, I don't play that game. And that's the trick. Don't play the game. If you allow a word like that to take power over you, they win. And I just won't do it. So I dare people to accuse me of Islamophobia. I do. And people in jest do that, but they're just joking.
Right, yeah, of course. Yeah.
They're just tweaking my nose. I do have a problem with the tenets of Islam, and Islam is different from Christianity, even though the Quran is largely a carbon copy of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
But the thing is, people in Islam, particularly in Islamic nations, they take their religion seriously. Over here, not so much.
Yeah.
Christianity went through its reformation, as Ayaan Hirsi Ali likes to say. And Islam needs its Voltaire. Problem is, all the Voltaires have fatwas on their head.
Yeah, they keep getting killed
or under threat of death. I mean, look at Salman Rushdie. He still has a security detail.
Which is, again, I guess, a criticism of a theocracy, or like the idea of theocracy, rather than of people who happen to follow a particular faith or idea, right?
Yeah. Islam, people like Majid Nawaz, who used to be a Muslim extremist, an Islamist.
Right.
And he's proof that people can change.
Yep.
We're not even going to talk about Reza Aslan, but he's something different. He actually gives cover to Islamists. Whereas Majid Nawaz does not. He recognizes that Islamism, which is the politicization of Islam, just as the politicization of Christianity, is a bad thing.
Right. Yeah, giving them political power or governmental power isn't the way you want to do things.
You don't want Sharia law. I mean, Linda Sarsour, and she's head of an organization in the U.S. for Islam-American relations, and she's just an awful. This brings me to another thing. What happened at the Women's March? I think the Women's March was great.
Right.
But there were some rather marred facts about it. One is excluding pro-life women, or
interesting.
There were groups that were excluded as if they're not women and don't have a problem with Trump.
Right.
And there was the whole being a Muslim for a day by donning hijab. That really bothers me. It's even worse when we talk about modesty fashion. This is a new word. This is another new word. Modesty fashion. Wearing hijabs. Do these people not realize that there are millions of women in the world, in Islamic nations, who are forced to wear this? How dare they? Fetishizing.
Yeah.
This is fetishizing a tool of oppression. And even worse, of course, there's the niqab and the burqa. Those are even worse. I mean, it's just trying to make half of your demographic disappear.
Right.
And what does it say about men that they go crazy when they see a woman's hair? Oh, my goodness. That is so misandric. Yeah. I don't get modesty fashion. I just don't.
Yeah, I honestly don't either. The idea that it's okay for Islam to, or an Islamic culture to cover up their women, while it's not okay for, say, an Amish or Mormons or like even a Western society to say, like, to tell people what they have to wear. Like,
yeah,
like in one you have people telling women what they have to wear, and in the other you have women telling people telling women what they have to wear, and it shouldn't be okay in either case.
Yeah, I mean, women can wear what they want.
Exactly.
Big deal. I mean, but that doesn't mean that it's beyond criticism. I find this whole modesty fashion fetishization of something that is a tool of oppression. It angers me. It angers me. I mean, you can do it. Fine. It's great. But don't expect any applause from me.
Yeah, it seems fair to just have an open discussion about, hey, I think that this is a tool of oppression and that I don't think that it should be worn by people, versus saying you have to wear this or you can't wear this. Like it's two different things, right?
Yeah, I actually heard this as an argument. Telling people not that they can't wear the hijab is like saying, you can do that when you tell women that they don't have to wear high heels. And I'm like, they don't.
Yeah,
they don't.
Right.
Now, I'm going to put in a little caveat in there, because right now this is a topic in the news, and there are workplace requirements where women have to wear high heels, and I so disagree with that.
Yeah.
And good on British Columbia for saying, nope, that's going to be out. That's gender discrimination.
Right.
And worse, it's actually a workplace health issue.
Yeah, that's right, eh?
I don't care. I don't find a woman less attractive just because she's not wearing high heels. Come on.
Right.
Wait, I don't know. Maybe I should.
Yeah, who knows, eh?
Yeah, I know. It's certainly not going to affect my dinner choice from the menu. It's not going to determine where I go for dinner if I go out.
Right.
It's just not. I don't care. That's the thing. People have got to stop caring so much about things. I care about the things that matter.
Yeah, maybe if it doesn't affect you, then maybe don't worry about it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Now, yes, when something, I will support people when it does affect them, even if it doesn't.
Right.
Affect, if I think that it shouldn't be affecting you.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily. I mean, you hear this a lot where we're giving voice for the people that don't have voices. Who doesn't have a voice with the internet today?
Right.
Nobody. And a lot of that is it really is virtue signaling. Have you actually talked to those people? And quite often the answer is no.
Right.
It's just their own impression that this is what they will think. That's kind of that's kind of patronizing. I know I'm using a pun here, but it is patronizing.
It is. I mean, I consider myself a social justice advocate, and I'm on the left side of things a lot of the times. But when somebody who is just speaking for someone else, I often wonder, like, how do you know that that's how they feel? Like,
and that's an awesome question to ask.
You know, if somebody else is speaking out, like if somebody's saying, well, this affects me in this way, then I'll support that person. But
sure,
when it's a third party saying, well, this affects that person in this way, well,
this kind of runs counter to some of the things I said earlier, but not really. We're talking in generalities, so
right.
Different situations might require different viewpoints. Like, for instance, speaking up for, like I said before, that people's experiences don't necessarily matter, but sometimes they do. I mean,
right.
it depends on what those are. People's experiences are often just the perceptions. When that's the case, I don't care. I mean, it's just a perception.
Right.
I'll do what I can to say, hey, maybe there's a different way of looking at this. And I hope people do the same with me. And that's fine. But when people, say, shut up and listen, you just lost me. I'm just walking out the door. I'm not interested anymore. I'm interested in discussion. I'm interested in ideas. And yes, sometimes I'm going to get offended. Not that matters. But I'm
right.
An emotional response. It's my responsibility. My offense is my responsibility. This is one of the big problems, I think, of today. People think that they are not responsible for their offense. That other people have offended them. No. You chose to respond that way.
Right.
Just because you did think about it doesn't mean that you've abrogated your responsibilities. Think about it. If we thought that offense was the other person's fault, road rage incidents, we wouldn't be prosecuting somebody taking a golf club out and bashing somebody else's car. We would be going after the person who was actually attacked. No, the law recognizes that.
Yeah.
We're responsible for our own reactions, and I think that this is view now that it's other people's fault that we got offended. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, no, that seems reasonable. I just wonder, like, is it? Do you think that it's fair for people to say, like, hey, that's offensive, and maybe you could have, and kind of say, hey, what if you worded that differently, or maybe you didn't use that term, or
you could. Well, it's always fair to say it. If that's the only reason, if there was nothing substantive in terms of the argument, I mean, offense is never substantive. It's just your emotional response to things,
right?
And how it's said is more about convincing people. I might be a little harsh at times, just a bit. I'm just sort of that's. And I could do better at that. And so that's another thing, according to my wife. And I think it's true. I'm trying to be nicer on the podcast. But the thing is that if, in terms of argument, sometimes there's no nice way to say something. And no matter how
True.
nice it is, it's offensive. Well, okay. And it's what comes after that. Why is it offensive? And I think that it does both sides good to examine that. Not just the person who, you could have said that differently or whatever, but the person who was offended. Why was I offended by that?
Right.
And that's a really important question. If there's something logical there, okay, I'm offended by, saying that the race riots in Baltimore wasn't racism, it was violent prejudice. Oh my gosh. I was offended by that. But I also think that there's an argument there. And because it enables racist activity. It diminishes the race issues that everybody holds racist issues to some extent. We
Right.
have. I'm not. No. That's we have our biases. That's not quite.
Yes.
Right. We have our biases. We do. Trick is to recognize the biases and deal with it. That wasn't bias. That was just straight out hatred because that person was white, knowing nothing else about that person. Nothing. Yeah. So I had a visceral response, but I think there's a logic there that justified it. But that's not why somebody should change. It's the logical part that is the reason. The offense is just superfluous. It doesn't. I'm not going to engage in the offense because if that's all that's there, there's nothing to engage with. I mean, you can't logic somebody out of something where they had a totally emotional and non-logical response. I just don't see it.
So I'm guessing that you think that quite often the pro-social justice movement type people, they use terms like sexism and racism as
they throw it around
to
like
shut things down, eh?
They throw it around like candy. It makes the words meaningless. It just doesn't even register with me anymore. Because that person doesn't agree with me, and then they all of a sudden either call me sexist or racist. It's just water off a duck's back. It makes the words meaningless.
Do you think that on occasion, or maybe it's a general rule, that people who oppose SJWs, as they say, do they ever use tactics that are similar?
Well, I used to think the term SJW itself was like that, but I use terms like regressive left too. But I think it's an accurate descriptor because it is regressive, like trying to curtail free speech, or my favorite one is that university in California where the black students wanted segregated housing. I'm just like, what? Again, pissing on the grave of Martin Luther King Jr. These people fought against segregation. Oh, yeah. Anyway, what we were talking about. That's right. I went on a tangent.
That's all right.
Where were we? What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, SJWs. Yeah, SJW is a bit of a. I think that a lot of social justice warriors take on that word, and I think that's awesome because they can think of themselves as warriors, and it's meant as a pejorative, but it's like there's some people have also done that with other words. I mean, they took the word gay,
right.
The LGBT community took that on as their own, and takes all the power away from it. Regressive left, it's a little harder to do that because it's meant as a descriptor,
right?
And so it's like calling somebody a communist. You can't really take the power away from that. It just depends on what your reaction is to the word communist.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, people tend to, for communist anyway, I know that there's definitely people who throw that around like crazy.
Oh yeah, especially in America. I mean, you hear the word socialist, and not you, but an American.
It means bad.
I'm an American, and I don't fear the word socialist. I mean, I live up here, for crying out loud. We have socialized medicine.
Yeah,
it's not an evil word to me. I don't care. I mean, we have an NDP government in this province, which scared the hell out of the Americans for a while. I don't know why. But that's the thing when we talk about the election and it happened with Bernie Sanders. What's her name? Hillary Clinton. I voted for Hillary.
Yeah,
California. But I'll be the first to say she ran a crappy campaign.
She did.
It was about as inspiring as a dead skunk on the middle of a road.
Yeah, she made a lot of rhetorical mistakes as well, where she alienated people that.
Oh yeah, and that's okay. This is another thing. I'm going to get to that in a second about the election. Bernie Sanders was very inspiring, but he had an Achilles heel so he calls himself a social democrat. I mean, that word social, the moment it's in there,
Yeah, you're done.
In America, oh, man. Yeah, so he had this Achilles heel. So I'm not sure he would have won. Hillary was a big disappointment. But a lot of this is people were saying that everybody that voted for Trump was a racist and a bigot and a sexist.
Right.
Don't do that. Just don't do that, because it's not true. Yes, there were racists, bigots, and sexists that voted for Donald Trump. I'm not going to pretend, but I'm also going to say that people were telling the world why they were voting for Donald Trump, and it had nothing to do with that. It had to do a lot with the PC climate, PC.
I found that from what I saw anyway, there was a lot of
There we go.
a lot of economic issues, people that weren't getting addressed, and he promised them jobs, and he promised to fix these economic issues.
You want to hear that?
Whether he could or not wasn't an issue. He was the only one talking about it.
Yeah, he actually had sort of an economic plan. It sucks. It's trickle down economics, as
Yeah.
Hillary pointed out, but she didn't have her own, did she?
No, that's right.
That's the problem. Trump was talking about manufacturing jobs going overseas. Well, they didn't go overseas. They just disappeared. Automation has taken those jobs away. They're not coming back.
No, that's right.
It's what took one person to create two things, and now it's one person creating 10 things. It's just efficiency is increased, and we're on the road to something which is very interesting. The Expanse. Have you ever read The Expanse or watched it on TV?
Yeah, I've been watching it a little bit. Like, I think I watched the first season, and then I haven't watched the second yet.
The books are really good too. They deal with the future Earth and the economics of it a little bit, not so much in the TV show. And it's everybody has a right to a basic income, no matter
Right.
what. Right. I think Switzerland has kind of dallied with this a bit, and we're going to have to go to that, because the jobs are going to disappear. They're just not going to. There aren't going to be any jobs anymore.
Production is just going to be all automatic to some degree anyway.
Well, look at the self-driving trucks that are now delivering beer.
Right.
This is not a one-off. This is going to happen all over the world.
Yeah.
Those jobs are going to be gone, and there's nothing to replace them. Now, there are some things that aren't going to be quite as easily automated that use human thought.
Yeah.
Not to say that truckers don't think, but to drive
is a job that can be done by
it. Can be replaced. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it's not so easy to replace like computer programmers, and then even that might go away too, because a lot of programming can be automated now.
Right.
But to recognize the need for that program, that's a little different. So you have more managerial positions that aren't going to be as easily done away with.
Well, I guess we're coming up on almost an hour here. So I'll get a couple questions in that are very specific.
And I have one question for you. So
Sure.
That's a topic that this is one of the problems I actually see with social justice, in that it needs a really good dose of skepticism. Here's one. I've got two examples.
Okay.
And both came from your Facebook page. And one is I was asking about systemic racism?
Oh, yeah, okay.
It was a while back.
Yeah.
And somebody responded the wage gap in between black and white men. And there's a problem with that argument, and it's immediately apparent. It's a logic fallacy. It's called affirming the consequent. What this person did was said the argument is a formal fallacy. If it goes, if P then Q, we observe Q, therefore P.
Therefore P. Yeah.
And the problem is that the final statement doesn't follow. The conclusion does not follow. So it means that yes, racism is sufficient as a condition for a wage gap, but it is not necessary because there can be other things.
Right.
So now I do not know why the wage gap exists in that case. That's not the one I've studied, but I just saw it. You can't do that because I also came up with a counterexample that is real. Asian men make 118% of what Caucasian men make, or white men.
Right.
And therefore racism? But it doesn't follow, does it?
I wonder, though, if there isn't some level of expectation because of their race that would play into that.
Well, there could be, but you haven't shown it.
No, that's true. Yeah, it's just a possibility.
Yes, it's a possibility. I'm not denying it as a possibility at all. I'm just saying that the argument, what you're using as evidence isn't. In fact, it's just confirming the claim. It's basically using the evidence for the claim. It's basically the evidence for generating the hypothesis as evidence for itself. It doesn't work. Now you can go and study that, and like I've seen a number of studies on the earnings gap between men and women, and it's actually mostly due to career choices and many other factors. But there's still 5 or 6 cents left over that we can't attribute to anything. But we still haven't even attributed to sexism, so we can't even talk about that. I have no idea what is behind the wage gap in between black and white Americans. But racism could very well be true, but the argument doesn't show it, and that's my point. There's another one. Here's another example. Let me ask you the question about trigger warnings. Why should we have trigger warnings? Why are trigger warnings a good thing?
I believe the intent is to prevent people with PTSD from having episodes or negative reactions.
Okay.
That seems like
I give you an A for empathy and F for skepticism. And there's a reason why. Have you ever talked to experts on treating PTSD about this?
I haven't talked to, but I have read some work, yeah.
Okay. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a psychiatrist who treats people for PTSD to say that trigger warnings are good. In fact, they would say they're bad because they enable avoidance behavior. And let me hear.
Well, but I have read things that say that quite often they will enable avoidance behavior until somebody has been treated long enough to deal with their trauma.
That's a rationalization. Here, this is from the National Center for PTSD. It's U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. By the way, do you know the most effective way of treating PTSD for soldiers coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan?
What's that?
It ain't trigger warnings. They actually take them back through the experience in virtual reality.
Right, but that's in a controlled environment, right? Like that's not environment.
That's true. You're right. But the thing is, avoiding it isn't the answer either. And long-term avoidance is very bad. It entrenches it, and it makes it worse. And what trigger warnings do is they enable this avoidance behavior. Here's what they say. Avoidance is a common reaction to trauma. It is natural to want to avoid thinking about or feeling emotions about a stressful event. But when avoidance is extreme or when it's the main way you cope, it can interfere with your emotional recovery and healing. And I was reading about another case, an actual case. This psychiatrist was treating a woman for PTSD. Obviously, this was in another country because this woman was tortured and forced to sign a blank sheet of paper so that, basically they can write whatever they want as some kind of a confession. And what do you think was her trigger?
Signing her name?
No, it's the color white.
Okay, like the page?
Yes, she couldn't even wear white socks. Now, how would trigger warnings be able to ever encompass all the potential triggers?
Well, yeah, that's a fair criticism. It can't really encompass every possible.
And it's just not possible. But we shouldn't be. We really shouldn't be enabling people that way. Well, and I don't believe that they actually relive the experience. And most of the time when people talk about PTSD, trigger warnings, it's because, it makes me uncomfortable. Who cares? That's half of why you're going to university. And you're supposed to be able to deal with uncomfortable ideas. So we're talking about people who've had actual real trauma. And what we should be doing is offering, and we do, offer on campus real help, and that's where
real counseling.
Counseling.
People should, if they have traumatic events in their lives, they definitely should be seeing a counselor. But
trigger warnings tell people they're broken. I don't find any positive in it. It tells them they're broken, and that it almost feeds into a narcissistic victim syndrome, where you play on that. I know Robert Zimmer has talked about this a bit. I got to find. I'll leave it, but he's talked about it too. The University of Chicago has said, no, we're not going to have trigger warnings, or definitely not safe spaces. Safe spaces are out. I mean, at a university, you've got to be kidding me. It's antithetical to the purpose of university.
Well, isn't there a difference between the idea of having a campus as a safe space and having a safe space for a particular person or group within a campus?
Well, there are already campus clubs, right? Where people get together, like-minded, share common interest, and that's fine. There's no problem with that. But a lot of these people don't want to be exposed to uncomfortable ideas, and I'm of the opinion they need more of that if they feel that way. You have to learn. I mean, what happens in real life when you're out of university? I mean, let's face it, university ain't real life. It's not, and life's going to eat them alive. And part of a university is preparing people for a career, and part of them is helping them deal with real life.
Yeah,
and I just don't see safe space. When we talk about safe spaces, when I talk about safe space as a university, well, one is you're safe from physical harm.
Right.
That should be true everywhere.
That should be true everywhere. Yeah.
And so it's kind of a banal kind of safe space. The other is ideas can be considered regardless of how someone feels about them. I mean, you can entertain ideas that without having to agree with them. I mean, that's the mark of a thinker.
Right.
And people now are like, oh, I don't agree with that, so I don't want to think about that kind of safe. Forget it. Grow up. And that's self-infantilization at universities. The one thing that I've heard more about safe spaces than is the idea that it was originally intended for LGBTQ groups, and so that they could go someplace where they wouldn't be even verbally attacked, say by Christians or religious people. People that are doing the verbal attacking should be either suspended or expelled. That's where it comes to fit the whole idea of physical harm. We're talking about rational discourse when we're talking about my country.
Right.
I'm not talking about people
actually attacking.
That is out of bounds and has been for a long, long time, and should be.
Right.
You don't do that. And so, but there have been LGBT campus groups for a long time too.
Right.
And nobody's saying you can't have one. Oh, sorry, except for Catholic high schools. But
yeah.
We got to get rid of those Catholic school systems.
Yeah.
Catholic school systems, Catholic healthcare institutions, they have no place in society. There's a social justice issue I can get behind. Let's get behind that. Get rid of religion-based schooling, at least in terms of government funding, and Catholic in particular. There are some other religions which have healthcare, which are involved with healthcare.
Yeah. In Canada, there's a lot of it's Catholic, though, right?
But a lot of it's Catholic. And what we're seeing now is, 90+% of palliative care and hospice beds are controlled by Catholic institutions, which will not acquiesce to requests for medical assistance in dying.
Right.
Which is a violation of somebody's rights.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what we need to address. And that's why I push very hard for that.
For sure. No, that's fair.
It drives me nuts.
All right, I'm going to ask you 2 more questions, and then I'm going to let you go.
Got my stuff out, so you get it.
So, first, what's one thing that if you had to shout it from the rooftops to get people to listen to you, about the social justice movement as you see them, that people don't grasp yet, that you want people to know about social justice?
One, huh?
Yeah, one the most important thing to you.
I'd have a toilet paper roll of I'd be reading it off. No, I still think the one that I think is the most important is stop using offense as a reason for anything.
That seems like a good one.
Stop. I just don't care. You can, I'm not saying people can't get offended. I'm just saying stop using it as a reason for anything. Right.
It doesn't really, I guess we kind of went into it already.
So, yeah, we did.
No,
so,
that's good.
I've said exactly what I meant to say today, and it's what, one thing that I really like about this is that you're engaging with people. I don't do this on the podcast, and I really want to, but I'm scared. I'm scared of it because not because I'm worried about my own ideas. I think about these things all the time. I'm pretty comfortable, and I've heard pretty much most if not all the arguments that are out there against my position, and I think that those stones have bounced off as far as at least in terms of my comfort with my ideas.
Right.
So I don't want to mistreat people. I really don't know if I could do it, and part of me wants to do it just to see if I can, and part of me wants to do that because I know Christine wants to have somebody who's in social justice. There's I keep saying pro-life on this. I never say pro-life. Anti-choice. Okay. Anti-choice
right.
Atheist that Christine wants to have on, and I just don't know if I could handle it.
Right, yeah. It would be a tough conversation to control yourself with, eh?
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to just be a moderator and just shut up.
Right.
I just stay right out of it as much as I can because I don't know if I could engage. It's tough. You had one more question, I think.
Yeah, I got one more. So if you had to say criticize your own perspective or your own side or the people you agree with, what do you think is a position that those people or your side, what do you think is a position that they hold that is maybe wrong or needs more refining?
Wow. Aside from the drama on the YouTube channels, I just hate drama. It's everywhere. I mean, it's whether it's inside the social justice advocacy community or the anti-SJWs. They're all about drama. I'm just like, oh, cut it out. I just don't care. I think both sides have issues when it comes to motivated reasoning.
Right.
It's very easy to. I'm sure I engage in it too. Very motivated reasoning is such an easy thing to get into. We tend to look at the evidence that confirms our position and don't also look for the disconfirming evidence. And that's one of the things I'm trying to stress these days, because you can confirm your bias in looking at the literature very easily. And if you don't look at the disconfirming evidence, you're not being skeptical.
Yeah, you're always going to end up. You can always find stuff that agrees with you.
Yeah, you can. And it's tough to look at that evidence that it doesn't agree with you, but it's the only way you're going to change your mind.
Yep. No, that sounds right. Well, thanks, Randy. This is where you get to plug whatever you want.
Plug whatever I want. Well, I plug the podcast. Legion of Reason Diversion, which spells out Lord. I wish I could take it. That's Nathan. Is that
why you added the D?
Yes, that's why I added the D. I had to figure out Well, it was Nathan Phelps's idea, and I'm like, let's see, what can I add? And I thought, diversion, I like that. So the word was mine, but not the idea. We were on YouTube and we're on iTunes, and I don't even know what podcatchers. I cast a broad net, and
right.
Just to get as many listeners out there. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Everybody's allowed to disagree with everybody else. Nobody should take offense. We're humans after all, right? People disagree all the time, but that's what leads to discourse and discussion. People don't always agree with me on the podcast. Christine doesn't always agree with me,
right?
And that's fine. But at the end of the day, we're still friends, and that's the way it should be.
No, that's good. Well, thanks, Randy. I appreciate you coming on. Okay, so that's where I'm going to end this interview. Me and Randy continued chatting for a little bit, but it wasn't really of any consequence to the interview. It was just idle chit chat between podcasters. I want to take a minute to talk about a couple of the things that Randy discussed. I don't have my notes in any particular order, so you may have to apply your own kind of analysis to where you think the notes and where my commentary applies to. But first, I want to say thanks again to Randy. That was really cool of him to come on and talk about his views. I know that quite often people are worried about expressing their views, and I know he said that he's not worried about his views being out there because he's given a lot of thought. Sometimes people worry about that, and I really appreciate him coming on and talking to me. So I want to be as brief as possible because I don't want to take any more of your time out of your lives. This was over an hour, this interview, and with an intro and an outro, this could take forever. But anyway, first I want to address intersectionality. I want to say that in my experience, intersectionality and intersectional activists are generally just striving for a balance. They're trying to help other people have their voice so that their experiences can be heard as well. And I realize we discussed in this interview that everybody has a voice on the internet today, but quite often these voices get muted out by more powerful voices. And I think that that's kind of what intersectionality is kind of trying to avoid. It's trying to help everybody express themselves and be heard by as many people as they can be. I think that's kind of what intersectionality is. I know that not everybody agrees with that. Somewhere in this conversation, Randy made the claim that black men, Black men commit almost half the violent crimes in the U.S. when the percentage of the population that they represent is very small. I think the number he said was 6%, but I think the number is actually closer to 13. I could be wrong on that though. I was just going through my notes here the other day when I was listening and editing the episode. I have a few links. They don't really pick a side as far as I can tell. One of them does for sure, and one of them is definitely just an opinion piece. But I have the UCR-FBI.gov crime stats from 2012 table in the notes, and I've got a channel4.com actually did a fact check on this, and I thought it was quite a good piece. It doesn't draw any conclusions per se one way or the other as to why this might be, but it does confirm that quite a disproportionate number of violent crimes is being done by black men. The other two pieces don't really paint the same picture. I'm not sure what the table portrays from the FBI. I think that it depends on what you're classifying as a violent crime in some cases, but it's worth looking at a little deeper. Why do men getting sentenced to 63% longer sentences than women? I have two links there that talk about this. One from the HuffPo, from 2012. It does talk about this. This is a thing that happens, and honestly, there isn't a lot of conversation about it. I found one feminist website that was looking at it, but it was just an opinion piece. There wasn't much to it. There wasn't much statistical information or solutions from what I could see. There wasn't a lot of activism. There's not a lot of activism involved in looking at this. I mean, me and Randy kind of discuss what we think the issue is, but there's nothing definitively saying one way or the other what is going on with that. I think that the something that Randy brought up, I think almost without thinking, like he talked about not using implicit bias or not calling implicit bias. When we talk about racism, we talk about explicit, outright racism. And I think that's an interesting conversation to be had. I think that the implicit bias is a type of racism, but at the same time, I can see where one would not want to classify that as racism in the way that we often think of racism. Like, implicit bias certainly has a place in this conversation of where systemic racism is, or what is occurring in society with racial issues. But it's interesting to discuss. Is implicit bias actual racism, or is it a different category? Something else, color blindness. I think people are using different definitions of this. The way Randy seemed to imply it was that we shouldn't be addressing people as anything other than people. We really shouldn't be seeing them as black or white or brown or red or, what have you. But I think that when people who are in social justice talk about color blindness, they're talking about color blindness as in like the seemingly ignoring of issues that occur when one is a part of a population that isn't the quote unquote norm. Like, and it's hard for me to really say this in a proper way, because I am a white dude. So when it comes to race, when I think of just a person, the image that comes to my mind is a white person. And I wonder if that is kind of what people are addressing when they're addressing colorblindness. Like, and in a sense, like, I know Randy talked about identity politics, and I think that colorblindness and identity politics, some of this commingles, like this mixes together different ideas. And when we talk about race, regardless of how we talk about it, we're discussing identity politics. But if we don't talk about race, that's what social justice advocates are calling colorblindness. And when we don't talk about race, then we're ignoring issues that affect people based on. And I hope that I expressed that properly. What else do I have? I have freedom of speech and on campuses and invitations. Obviously, I disagree with Randy on much of this. I did my debate with the Wayward Atheists guys, or with Ed from the Wayward Atheist podcast, and I expressed my views pretty well in that. It's available on the Brainstorm podcast playlist. If you go back, I think it's 3 or maybe it's 5 episodes back now. It's the only special episode though. Everything else falls into either the Shift to Reason or Skeptic, Shift to Reason Radio or Skeptic Studio. The debate is its own standalone episode. Maybe I'll post a link to it in the show notes here. The philosophy class where black and Asian kids wanted to address, or wanted black philosophers rather than white European philosophers. This is in the school of African and Asian studies. This is not European studies. This is not this is a school of the university that's designed to discuss black and or African and Asian studies. And it makes perfect sense to me that they would want the curriculum to reflect that. And that would mean less white philosophers. Randy may disagree with me after knowing more of the details on that. We may be able to have a conversation back and forth sometime. I'm not sure we'll ever get to it, because we're both incredibly busy people, but I think that there's more details to that. And I don't think it's just a bunch of kids wanted the university to just stop teaching about white philosophers. I think that was a mischaracterization of the issue. And it could, giving the benefit of the doubt, is that Randy simply didn't have all that information. Something that he said in this about the when people say shut up and listen, and for him that's enough. That's it. He's no longer interested. I think that this is addressed later in another conversation that I have with Brian Harrington, I believe is the interview. So it'll be a while from now. But one of the things that me and Brian discussed said, like, Brian says, that's fine. Then you don't have to be there. Many of these spaces are for people who are willing to listen more than talk. And if you're ready to listen, then that's fine. And if you're not ready to listen, then that's also fine. You just don't have to be in those spaces. I think that that's fair. I may be too much of a softie on this. I'm sure that many people think that I am, but I think that if I go to a space where it's a Black Lives Matter type event, my place is to listen. That's just where my head is at. And I hope that if I wasn't ready to listen and I wanted to, and I left because I wasn't ready to listen, I would hope that people would understand that just means that I'm not ready rather than talk. And that this is not a reflection on necessarily my views on race, but just that my own desire to speak may get in the way of my helping. It's obviously not a clear-cut issue because some people have amazing ideas, but I think it is fair to say if you're not ready to listen, then maybe you shouldn't be in that space until you are. But that's just me. I kind of feel like he strawmans the university cultures, but I don't want to attack his points on it too much. I'm sure if you agree with him, then you'll agree with him. And if you disagree with him, then you disagree with him. And I'm sure that I don't even have to really address that. Something that I have this whole paragraph I wrote on argumentation, and because Randy kind of dismissed the wage gap as evidence of systemic racism. And I think that this happens a lot. We get caught up in these formal logic type discussions when what we're doing is an informal type of argumentation, and it doesn't do us any good to say you can't do that. That's a logical fallacy. What he needs to do is, or what we need to do is say, okay, so if the wage gap for black men is evidence of systemic racism, I would like you to further support that. I want you to show me a way in which this wage gap is directly attributed to to systemic racism. Or if it's just one piece of the puzzle, perhaps you can say that police brutality against black men, unfair sentencing practices in a court of law, a wage gap, high unemployment rates, unfair hiring practices in different places, like a disproportionate level of poverty. These pieces as all together, what am I saying? I'm saying that you need more than one piece of evidence. And each of those pieces of evidence, like wage gap, police brutality, disproportionate poverty, these things all on their own also have to be explained. And this is how informal argumentation works. And in a sense, it's not about the logical fallacy. These are all different things, but each claim has to be justified, and the link to systemic racism has to be proven. And I know that asking for this stuff seems like a lot, but if we want to draw conclusions from, if you want to draw a line from the wage gap to systemic racism, then there has to be a warrant. You have to have a warrant for that inference. I'm sorry if I'm getting too deep into the argumentation process of it, and less focus on the content of the argument, because the content and the argumentation process aren't separate in informal arguments. So that's just, I had this note and I wanted to kind of get that off my chest. I kind of think that dismissing the wage gap as evidence of the systemic racism is a mistake, even though it's technically a logical fallacy. We are not engaging in a formal debate. We are engaged in informal argumentation, and it can be a piece of the larger puzzle if the evidence supports it. I want to emphasize that as well, because that's where most of these conversations end, is in the justification of evidence, the evidence that is not necessary, and the justification of using it in the way that it's being. Okay, enough on that. And the final thing is that I actually cover PTSD and trigger warnings with a later interview, and I will say that I end up on the same side of it as I did before. I think that part of this pushback on trigger warnings is a misunderstanding of the way that therapy works. You can't just have triggering content anywhere, like, and call it bad to prevent people from seeing that. Like, avoidance behavior is necessary in many ways until a person has processed the trauma until enough to deal with those triggers. Like immersion therapy or therapy, exposure therapy to triggers is not done out in the world. It's not done randomly. You don't, you do your best to control yourself and control your environment until you can come into contact with those things in a controlled way. And I think we kind of touched on that a little bit, but I just wanted to emphasize that after the fact. Again, I'm not trying to talk shit about anybody here. Like, Randy was great to talk to. He's a great guy. I really, really am looking forward to putting out the rest of these interviews. I hope you enjoy it. You can check out Randy's podcast at legionofreason.com or check them out on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcatcher. You can find more of these episodes at Spreaker.com/show/The Hardcore Skeptic Examines, or you can find me on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, or just about anywhere else you can find podcasts. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at Hardcore Skeptic, and like my page on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Hardcore Skeptic. If you want to support this show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Hardcore Skeptic. And remember to check out my other shows, the Brainstorm podcast and Positively Skeptical. You can do that at thebrainstormpodcast.com or brainstormblog.net.